afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to all of you joining us this afternoon, and a warm welcome to our panelists, which I look forward to introducing to you a little bit later in this afternoon session. I think it's going to be a bumper event this evening, and we're going to have lots of debates and lots of discussions, so we look forward to the engagement. So just in terms of where we are, this evening we're looking at individual change, and our panelist is going to look at some of the following concepts. So as we look at individual change, we'll debate the aspect of, well, what does it look like in our organizations at the moment? So what are the aspects of resilience to change? What are some of the critical skills that support individuals through the change process? We'll look at that nasty acronym, which everyone's using, work from home, and what does that mean as individuals as well as organizations? And then last but not least, so how do we as leaders then look at creative solutions and engagement mechanisms for engaging with our teams? So in terms of where we are, a little bit just on housekeeping, please, if we can just ask for all microphones to be muted, to mute our microphones, simply because we do a recording and it's nice for us to share, so it allows everybody to hear clearly. Please, if you have any questions, you're welcome to pop it into the chat or raise your hand. We're happy to engage with the audience. It really is about a two-way conversation to hear your opinions and engage with us. And then, as I mentioned, it will be recorded. So anybody that's joining the session will receive the recording of the event. So a little bit around where we are and where we've been. So when we initially started this, we kicked off our sessions with looking at two key concepts, which is around leadership and exponential organizations and scaling in 2021. And that really was around looking at our research and considering what is the future skills needed for organizations and individuals to thrive. But as we start looking at those new skills and we start unpacking, so what are the authentic and ethical leadership needs within organizations, we naturally start and say, well, it does start with us as individuals. So the session last month was looking at organizational change, and today we're going to tackle the concept of individual change. So from an individual change perspective, William Bridges, a renowned author, speaker, and organizational consultant, he defines change as the inner psychological process that people go through. And come to terms with a new situation or change. All right. So the challenge is that despite the fact that we are constantly going through change, we do have a natural inclination to avoid it. For whatever reason, it's not something that we are particularly comfortable with, even though we understand that there are multiple benefits to handling change effectively. So we look at some of those concepts, and it talks about the fact that we grow personally through the change experience. So we learn to adapt to change based on the fact that we get it more and more frequently. Most importantly, though, when we look at handling of change, there's also the concept of what's in it for me. So it relates to, so what is the improvement that we can get and what is the benefit that we're going to see through this change process? But of course, depending on the severity of the change event and the period at which this change happens overcoming that can obviously be tough. And that results to building resilience, which is one of the concepts we're going to talk about this afternoon. And of course, change does mean letting go of the old and taking on the new, which naturally brings about lots of opportunities and possibilities. But I think for some of us, and I think probably for most of us, change is a difficult concept and it is a difficult thing. Of course, the problem at the moment, and this is what the graph represents, is the rate of change impacts an individual's level of security and comfort when it comes to change. So the more change an individual faces, the more fear it creates. And this naturally results in the greater threat to our level of security. And so we start seeing the negative reactions in the workplace on the part of employees that do not necessarily understand the impact and how it affects them personally, but also then how does that actually impact on the organization's ability to deliver on the desired outcomes of change. So even if we naturally can see the benefit of it, doesn't necessarily mean we buy into it, even though we can see that potentially the impact it's going to have on the organization. So it therefore makes sense for us to understand the rationale for our resistance to change and why we fear it. So fear is an emotional reaction, and often rather than focusing on the feeling of fear, we build up or develop an understanding of the cause of uncertainty and why we're afraid of it. When we gain an understanding of what triggers our fear, we can rationally find ways to overcome that uncertainty. So according to Changing Minds in 2020, understanding the answers to these questions can unlock our results and the resistance to change. Okay. So understanding the reasons for resistance can help us to handle change more effectively in our personal and professional lives. And it's also understanding the underlying cause of that resistance to change that allows us to put corrective measures in place so that we can navigate the change process. Of course, failure to put effort to successfully navigate the change process could result in the change process not being adopted, irrespective of what we actually see the benefits being associated to that change. So if we just look at the two graphics, it talks about the fact that there could be loss of trust. We don't necessarily trust the organization and the change that they're busy implementing. We see the uncertainty. We're not necessarily having a good understanding of where that comes from. Now, naturally, what we'll start seeing in our employees in terms of the lack and resistance to that change is naturally lack of morale. So we can start seeing the motivation levels of our teams. Low productivity, so that starts impacting on performance output. It links back to we understand the need for change, but we don't necessarily understand the impact on the organization for not changing. So breakdown in constructive communication, unexplained physical illness, and increased absenteeism. And I think when we start engaging our panelists in a few minutes, we're going to start seeing that when we really start talking about the impact of the current level of change that we're seeing in our organizations, we'll start understanding exactly what it is that we're starting to see come through our people in organizations, but also then how is the organization adjusting, adapting, and responding to that resistance from our teams. So I think we can all relate to the change curve, and it's one of the things that we'll debate a little bit later on in the session. But the change curves helps us to create an understanding of how it is that people react when they're faced with significant change. And it also highlights that depending on the level of the severity of the change experienced, that some people will take longer to move through those various stages compared to others. So I think for us, the change curve is based on the Kubler-Ross model, which was created in 1969, and it outlines the key emotional responses that people are likely to experience when undergoing major change. And this is obviously where they feel that there's a result in loss or grief, something that is affecting us from an emotional perspective. So the change curve has been adapted to become a powerful tool that allows us to guide people and organizations through the change process. And it really does allow us to focus on the emotional side of change when it comes to organizational change and engaging with our people. So I think we know that the stage process consists of 4, which really starts with the status quo. So I think it's like anything. If we just relate this to the substantial changes we've seen globally, and if we just use COVID for a moment, which has resulted in things like lockdown, work from home, the volume of changes that has had to happen in business with regards to adapting. We can understand that. I think when we first went into lockdown, we all went into the concept of it's only going to be for 3 weeks. So I'm just going to stay in my home for 3 weeks. And then at the end of it, everything's just going to go back to normal. And we're just going to go back to the office and we're just going to continue. And slowly but surely, I think we got to the realization that might not necessarily happen quite like that. Okay. So I think the first thing is the shock and the denial, because we all thought it's never going to happen. It's only happening overseas in China. And then it slowly started resonating that, okay, we're now going to be here. And so I think at the beginning, people sort of act calmly and rationally, and we sort of ignore it and we leave it alone. But then as it starts getting closer and closer, we start understanding that we now need to deal with this. And so we start seeing the flood of emotions. And like anything else, we start then going anger, frustration, anxiety. What does this mean? I don't understand it. What's going to happen to me? And so as individuals, we start seeing what's happening around us in our personal spaces, but we also then start seeing what is happening in the business and in our organizations. And so we have a huge level of unpredictability and uncertainty that starts coming with navigating that space. And so depending on the extent of the emotional turmoil, the negative behaviors then start sort of exposing themselves through our engagements with individuals. And so we start getting the anger and the bitterness and the resentment and fundamentally that resistance to change. And in some people, it might be loud and vocal, and it's very clear that they're unhappy. And then for others, it just becomes a passive behavior. And we'll talk a little bit from a leadership perspective. How do we manage that? But slowly but surely, we hope that when we start moving towards the exploration, where people start sort of going, okay, we are here now. You know, what are the benefits? What are we getting out of this? How does things look? And slowly but surely, people start buying into what that looks like. And they talk about the exploration phase being kind of where people start moving between the two concepts, and they either start rebuilding and accepting, and so we can see a natural move into accepting the change, or alternatively, they go back and they go, oh no, hold on a second, and we go back into the questioning mode of, I'm skeptical, I'm really not too sure, I don't know if this is a great idea. The reality, though, is that from a change curve perspective, the intent is to move individuals to the stage of rebuilding, because the intent of the rebuilding is where people start understanding and accepting the change, and they believe and become committed to ensuring that the change takes place because they start seeing the benefit of that change. In terms of being focused, productive, teams working together and really embedding the changes in their daily processes. So that's where we start seeing new workflow processes, new engagements, teams coming together and wanting to be part of the change movement. So while people move through the stages at various paces, transitioning our teams is necessary to manage the change effectively. But of course, depending on the severity of the change, some might become stuck in one phase or even move back and forward between the previous phases as they move towards acceptance and commitment. But we're going to talk about it a little later on, because I think what we want to challenge here is, well, is this still relevant? And based on the volume of change at the moment, how well are we doing in our organizations with regards to managing the change curve from an organizational change, but also from an individual change? So our response to change. So, you know, Elizabeth Edwards states that resilience is accepting our new reality, even if it is a less good one, and that's very badly English, but that's the way it reads, than the one we've had before. So we can either fight it, you can do nothing about it, and we can scream or shout, or we can just accept it, try, and determine what is it that's good in it. So distress can affect our daily functioning in many ways. And the Mayo Clinic says that it does really affect our mood, our body, and our behaviors. And we know that. People will talk about the fact when you've had a really stressed day, just go and take a walk, even if it's just around the corner, because it does help just the way we think and the way we feel. But in response to stressful situations, we really do choose how we respond. And irrespective of the psychological triggers associated with the threat state, Because bearing in mind, the threat state says, well, I'm either going to stay and I'm going to fight, therefore I want to be part of the change process, or I'm out of here. And those become the situations that people find themselves in, and how do we respond to that? The question is, how do we better control our response to the stressful situations and manage it? And that is really where we talk about the question of resilience. So there's sort of three key concepts that change talks about when it comes to managing change. And the one is resilience, which is our ability to recover from and adjust easily to misfortune or change. So if resistance refers to adjusting and recovering from an event, what does organizational change look like? And the definition of resilience for an organization is the ability of an organization to anticipate, prepare for, respond, and adapt to incremental change and sudden disruption in order to survive and prosper. So that's all great. And so we can look at resilience and we can define. And yeah, Mercure 2018 notes that even though building workforce resilience is a key factor, does not necessarily guarantee that it's going to work. And organizational resilience is also influenced by external factors like marketing restructure, technological disruption, and so, by the way, COVID, and then the organization's capacity to anticipate and respond to that change and that disruption. So when you look at resilience, it talks about 5 key concepts. It says, well, what is our ability to bounce back? Can we withstand and can we recover quickly? And I think at the moment we're getting it all the time. And so just when we think we're bouncing back, the next change comes into play. It talks about reverting to the original size. So being stretched and then coming back to business as normal, stretched and coming back. It also looks at persisting and last but not least, being determined. So yeah, I think there's just a final quote there from Nelson Mandela around resistance. It says, the greatest glory in living lies not in never failing, but rising every time we fall. And then the last concept is just around resilience and mindset. And it talks about the fact that there's 4 constructs when it comes to resilience and mindset. And the first one is resilience, but that links to hope, efficacy, and optimism. And linked to resilience and mindset is the growth and fixed mindset. And really what that says is that the fixed mindset suggests that individuals' qualities and potential are fixed. And as a result, they feel the need to improve themselves all the time. In contrast, the growth mindset suggests that just because we have control of our abilities, it means that we can develop and improve these abilities through hard work and effort. So an individual's mindset plays a critical role in the ability to cope with challenges and the challenging situations that we face. Overcoming resistance to change is however critical in order for us to move forward, especially if we just look at the volume of change. However, knowing that change is required doesn't necessarily force somebody to change, and it doesn't necessarily make it easy. So the resistance to change is most often based on negative views, on concerns, on challenges, and how we negatively perceive the impact on our lives. And these perceptions are fueled by mindsets, which is based on the powerful beliefs of our lives up until now. Fundamentally, it talks about the fact that we have a choice. We either let our mindset define who we are and we accept the fixed mindset, or we can see the challenges and difficult situations as opportunities to grow and develop and improve ourselves, which is the growth mindset. And it's only when we understand that our belief systems are based on interpretations of what we believe that we realize that there's a better way of interpreting it and moving forward. So to change one's mindset from a limiting to a fixed mindset requires positive action and a willingness to change. And that just leads to our last concept before I get our panelists to join us, which is around the emotional intelligence. So we talk about resilience, we talk about mindset, And the third thing that the change curve talks about is resilience linked to emotional intelligence. And it says when we develop our mindset, the abilities are reinforced through hard work and declaration. But the concepts of emotional intelligence talks about the five concepts on the right-hand side. And that talks about self-awareness. So are we aware of what's happening around us? Can we truthfully and accurately identify emotions in themselves and in others? Do we understand and manage our own emotions? Within that process, are we able to effectively communicate our emotions and place oneself in someone else's position through empathy? Empathize with another person, use emotions to visualize goals, and regulate one's inner world in terms of the social skills and how we engage with others. So those are sort of the key concepts that when we look at individual change, and we talk about it in all our sessions, but we've linked it back to what is the textbook saying and what is academic saying, and that really is the key concepts. But we all know that where we sit at the moment, things are very different, and the change curve is steep for everybody. So I'd like to just welcome you to our panelists this evening. And I know that I can see all of them, but I'm going to ask them just to sort of wave and indicate with a hi when we introduce. But I've got my colleague Sharon online this evening. And Sharon is our Education, Training and Development Executive for Omni HR Consulting. And she's committed to contribute towards people development and making a meaningful difference in leadership. And as a client relationship manager, her objective is to make learning more accessible across various sectors. And then we've got Gino. Gino, thank you for joining us tonight. So Gino worked for over 14 years for Accenture and is now worked to creating his own consulting and advisory firm called Ventura Smiths. He's a business strategist who purposefully and skillfully applies workforce and organizational levers to achieve sustainable business outcomes. He's passionate about making a real difference to his clients, businesses, their people, and ecosystems. So thank you. Then we have Christelle. Hi, Christelle. Christelle is organizational development practitioner who solves problems by consulting with individuals, teams, and organizations through coaching, facilitation, and applying her own experience in the corporate and nonprofit space. She is an accredited Enneagram practitioner and an ontological coach, and leverage her experience of 23 years in the corporate IT operations and HR spaces. So thank you. And then we've got Mr. Allan Bolt. Allan has so South African Labour Resource Services is led by Allan Bolt, and his partner is a senior consulting support to clients, together with a small team of consultants and external service providers that will ensure that comprehensive response to any client's HR requirements is provided. And in this time, he has attended in excess of 2,000 conciliation and arbitration cases at the CCMA. Allan is well known at the CCMA. I don't know if that's a good thing, Allan, where he's established a reputation for fairness, legal accuracy, and a keen negotiator. I can attest to that. So thank you, guys. Allan. Good evening. Lovely. So I'm going to ask Gino to kick us off this evening. So Gino, we spoke about the change curve, and I mentioned that I'm going to ask you to interrogate that a little bit for us. So in your opinion, do you still believe that the change curve is valid and current?
That's a loaded question, right? On a call, on a panel where we are talking about the change curve and individual change. Firstly, thank you for having me. Thank you for the introduction and the welcome. Afternoon to all the attendees and my co-panelist. In response to your question, do I think the change curve is still relevant, right? Here's my consultant answer. Yes and no. So yes and no, and definitely not in isolation. So interestingly, I was not aware that it was founded or conceptualized in 1969. So that should allude to why I say no, right? But why do I say yes? I say yes because the principles and the logic and the methodology is sound. So the fact that it's been around since 1969 shows that there's some merit to why it's been around this long, right? And there's been definite value into why it's been around this long. I mean, without going into the academic and the methodology, the theory behind it, the principles work, and they have worked over time. You can't argue with a lot of what you presented, Cindy. That is there, right? We can't argue with the methodologies that talk to ADCAR, creating awareness, creating desire, reinforcing knowledge, reinforcing ability, along the journey that supports people to navigate the change curve. Those are all things that work. Where the complexity comes in and why I say no is to the fact that change is happening at a much faster pace than what it's ever happened, right? While it's happening at a faster pace, this is also the slowest it will ever be. We can accept that as a fact. It's only going to get faster. If you think about the organizations we work in, the jobs that many of us do, a lot of these companies and the things that we use, the products we use, right, did not exist 2 years ago, 3 years ago, some of it even a few weeks ago, right? We live in a continuously changing environment for us as individuals, for us as consumers, for us as employees, for those of us fortunate enough to be leaders. What does this mean for the change curve, right? It means that it's sound, it's got good logic, it's got a track record of success, but also that it needs to adapt and it needs to evolve to stay relevant with the times in a constantly changing world. Cool. So, sorry, the screen changed. I thought there was a question. Yeah, so change is happening at a much faster pace. It's constant, it's ongoing, and for this reason, we need to evolve our approach to change. Before, it used to be something that happened to us, and it was the responsibility of others, right? Most companies had a change manager, if they were lucky, who was actively trying to manage the change and manage the experience of those impacted, making some type of concerted effort to do change impact assessments, to manage your experience of probably a technology implementation, right? Or a business restructure, or whatever it might have been. Those things used to take 2 years. Whereas now they happen much faster. They happen overnight. What does this mean? This means that you can't long-term plan change. You can't say, right, we have a 2-year project, right? We have 6 months to understand the change, 4 months to build content, and 3 months to get people familiar with that content. If you think of, I mean, COVID, right? If you think of the apps that update overnight, if you think of data science, which became an industry and a significant need, not overnight, but gradually out of the blue. These are all things that if your eye is not on the ball, if you are not resilient and prepared for them, you might get left behind. So in the old world, while change was managed by others, if you were lucky, a change manager. If you were not lucky, it would have been done after the fact, right? After go live, and you would be change managed after the fact. Now there's a responsibility on everyone to be resilient and to be accepting of the fact that change happens. And when it does, the onus is on you as an individual, whether you are a leader, whether you are an employee, whether you are a consumer, whichever role you take up, you might wear multiple hats to adapt. Not always will there be a case of someone managing you along that change curve. Often the change will be sudden. You need to be prepared to accept and adapt. It might not always be great, but in that you need to make the most of it, right? You need to make sure that you are navigating and that you are in a state that is optimal. Think of it as a GPS, right? You set the direction, you want to go somewhere, things happen. There's a flood, a pipe burst, a robot is out, there's an accident, you need to reroute. So for leaders, what this means is have a vision, have a rough idea of where you want to go. Over time, yes, you motivate that vision, get people to buy into it, yes, but over time you will need to reroute, still in pursuit of that destination, right? You as the person on that journey, whether you walk in, taking the bus, riding your bike, driving your car, you have different options of how to get there. For your for the space you find yourself in, various routes or options might be optimal. It's up to you as the individual, right, to do what's best fit. You have a goal more often than not. You have to get there at a certain point in time. And if you don't, you've missed it. So work within the constraints that are very real and do your best to deliver and achieve. all we can do, and all individuals can do, those of us on the call, is accept that we live in a changing world, man. All of us have a cell phone, right? I just checked my cell phone now. I won't say which make, but regardless whether you're Android or Apple, we all have stores, our Apple Store, Google Store, and our apps update overnight, right? We don't mind because we accept that it's to improve the app. Leaders are leading the businesses because they want the businesses to succeed, right? Seldom will it be a leader in a business who fundamentally wants to fail. People in teams want to win. There is a middle ground. Leaders need to motivate and encourage the employees to get on the journey. Employees need to be up to the challenge. So to answer the question, I know there's time, so yes and no, and not in isolation would be the answer.
Thank you, Gino. Yeah, so the baseline is the academics is sound, and we know that the change process still works. But to your point, the change is happening very quickly. So yes, we know we need to adapt. Yes, we know we need to change. And like you correctly said, nobody wants to fail. Neither a business owner, a team, or an individual wants to. So Sharon, maybe you can then have a look for us. So if that's the case, and we don't have 2 years to project plan and have this beautiful plan for change, and we don't necessarily have a change manager in place that's going to hold our hand through the process. So what do we as leaders then do to support our teams through this rapid change and through the change curve? Mute.
One day we're going to get used to the mute button, guys. Thank you for the question, Cindy. I mean, Gino, there were so many nods when you were talking just about, I made a note here, it's going to get faster and faster. It is so absolutely true. So, I mean, as a client relationship manager, I so often now of late have conversations with our clients around human capital and how things have changed for employees and employers. And I believe as leaders, all eyes are on us to see how ready we are to ensure that we meet the needs of the individuals in our teams and our organizations, and that we build a talent pool for the future world of work. So for me, the question was, what is there things that we do new, or is there things that we have done that we can use? And I know with the pace that we should be thinking of digital transformation, but are there things that are basic and foundational when it comes to the individual and change? And I know that the buzzword is still agility. I mean, often during my client engagements, the talk is all around building gig and fluid economies. I at first had to go and Google it and see, what does this mean? And it is how quickly can things be done, especially during these times where organizations find themselves not meeting the needs of the end user because of a crisis. I mean, we work in a social compact. Today you serve me, tomorrow I serve you. And so the work on demand model is certainly a huge focus for many organizations at the moment, which is something we need to focus on as leaders. It certainly is a chosen model for Omni in our learning and development space. I often have these discussions now, and where we can ensure that we meet or have a talent pool that meets the need of our customers. And yeah, we know that for leaders, human capital in today's landscape presents so many unique challenges. Many leaders have not had a plan for previous. I mean, it's all new. So employees and employers alike are finding ways to navigate the new workplace norms. I mean, and I feel it remains essential to reflect on previous human capital management strategies to analyze how those could apply to today's practice. And that's why I'm saying, do we throw away all the old, or are there some of the old that we can still use? And we may not have a clear forecast. However, there are certainly strategies that have worked in the past and may still be implemented in the now. And yeah, I mean, we all agree that strong, clear leadership, and as Gino was said, and some of the things that Cindy mentioned earlier, affects both the quality and quantity of work employees completely. So if I sit back and reflect and I think about what is it that leaders still need to do, and what is it that our human capital still needs? Never, in my opinion, will coaching, mentoring, and training go away. In my opinion, leaders need to find effective ways of coaching their teams, especially in a time of crisis like COVID. I mean, COVID, I don't even want to use the word. It's just here. It's a crisis. Another for me is to practice empathetic leadership. I mean, we all know that that is a type of leadership that enables teams to adapt more freely and facilitate more effective communication, even while working remotely. I mean, a big topic from engagements that I have with clients is how do you measure employment productivity when they're working from home? So I know that we're going to talk about that today. How do you do that? It's so important to consider and to investigate. And what are some of the surveys and research that we do to see that they are still productive? And there, your work on demand models play a big role if productivity is not met. So yeah, so for me, I guess it's easy for leaders to get frustrated with employees who are resistant to change. But what leaders need to understand is that humans are wired up to look at anything unfamiliar. And Cindy, you said that as a threat. Even if it doesn't make much sense to a manager who wants to change its system or process, and there are likely to be a wide range of responses to change, and managers must make the time to deal with each one. And that's my other point. Are we making the time to deal with each individual? And as you know, as leaders, we must realize that people will be anxious when they hear about change. There will be fears, and you said it earlier. There will be loss and there will be sadness and real concerns about whether they're going to end up a victim. People may already be overloaded with work, and this will just add to their stress. So if leaders don't make time, in my opinion, if leaders don't make time to deal with employees on an individual basis and ignore the undercurrents of stress about change, the failure to support workers can be huge. So yeah, leaders, this is a favorite word. Your human capital, your people are the most important part of your business. Your competition can copy everything about an organization, that's the truth, but they cannot copy your people or the results they achieve for your organization. If employees are supported during change, implementation will be seamless and swift. We need to remember organizations don't change, people do. So yeah, I read this article and the organization seeking ways to be more supportive about employees. And so a few came to mind and it stuck out for me and takes me back to what I said earlier. What do we do in an environment where there is change? I mean, call on the experience that we have and that we know. A change management team, mid-managers, past managers, the ability to execute the change roadmap is going to be important. Tapping into employee talents. Do we know what our employee talents are? I often have discussions around when that person was recruited, there was a CV and you forgot about that person having a degree, and there we go with the experience. I mean, I had a discussion yesterday with a leader and we were talking about this qualification where we offer where somebody's just not doing what they're supposed to, and actually her line has given up on her. And I'm saying, why are we investing so much time with our D players? I'm sorry to call them D players. Why are we not focusing on our A players who we need to now start developing with career progression? Because that's our workforce 2030 leaders. What are we doing to ensure that they're going to experience a change of what the future looks like? And then the other point that they mentioned is ensuring that we do have sufficient funds. No major change is going to happen with a zero budget. And I think that where businesses are at the moment, that's a struggle. And then my favorite one, of course, is investing in continuous learning. Managers and employees need to be trained. They need to be change ready. They need to have good knowledge of how things are changing in the business environment. They need to be included in the digital transformation conversations. Have them in your panel. Include them in. Have a policy of inclusivity. And then, of course, and this is very hard to do, reward workers. Are we continuing that? Do we know what they want to be rewarded? It's not always money. People always know, I say money doesn't drive me, but does my line manager know what does drive me? So yeah, Cindy, for me, when it comes to what are some of the things that leaders need to look at when we are experiencing this change and in a crisis, is some things that were old that is never going to change. Is change going? Is it going to be faster and quicker? Absolutely agree with what Gino has said. The question is, how prepared are we to be agile, Lisa's favorite word, and to create that talent pool where I can pull on to ensure that I will always execute the principles that my business is built on. Yeah, that's for me.
Excellent. Thank you. Thanks, Sharon. Yeah, I think if I just look at the comments just coming through, people are saying investing our people, the business results will follow. Engagement, relationships, capital. we can't reap rewards where we don't invest. So 100%. And then Wahid just noting felt leadership. So I think, Sharon, what you've mentioned there, just in terms of your comments, you've mentioned a couple of things like the work on demand and work from home. And these type of concepts are starting to have an impact on staff and organizations. So Christelle, can you talk us through, so what does this mean for individuals within this change process? Christelle, we can't hear you. I saw you unmute, but we can't hear you. Mm-mm.
And now?
Yes.
Okay, maybe it's my earphones. So as I was preparing for the session, I was thinking about last year when COVID hit. 2 months before COVID hit, I actually left my job to work from home because I thought it would be all very nice to be flexible, to be this digital nomad. And so I probably went into this change a little bit more prepared than others. And funny, I think, oh, have I lost you? My screen was blinking a bit. It's funny when I realized I was struggling just as much as the next person, you know. And I think what COVID's really done is it's brought us, before I was able to take myself, a curated version of myself into the office and present parts of myself, right? With work from home, people are in your house. There's no geographical separation between your kids making a noise inside, plus you've got to be a school teacher while you're also a worker, a leader. I saw Lisa's comment earlier about leaders themselves are under so much pressure, you know? So I think what's really, this work from home, the impact that it's really had is that it's almost forced us to relate to each other as human beings and not just conceptual ideas as we can in the office, because we can take parts of ourselves, cut it out. People say, you know, can't be so emotional at work. Well, now I'm at home, so now I'm emotional and COVID is happening. So maybe from an ontological perspective, the three things, so the technology that we have as human beings to facilitate change is we've got language and our thoughts, we've got our moods and emotions, which to me is the biggest thing that's come above the line since COVID has happened. And then we've got our behaviors, our bodies, we can move. So earlier on, Gino said, you know, we all have to adapt, and it's true. It's not just, you know, nobody's going to lead you. And actually, I've never really had the title of change manager. I know it said change manager, but in various roles, I performed a supporting function in helping people change. So whether it's individual change, Sharon mentioned coaching. I think the important thing, why I mentioned the three different technologies that humans have to change, is we can look at either one of those and effect change from there, you know? So actually, because so much change is happening, there's a lot of anxiety in the air, and we absorb that anxiety, okay? So what is anxiety? Anxiety is simply a fear of what the future is going to hold. The opposite of anxiety is wonder or curiosity. Oh my, what is the future going to hold? And so there are ways for us, emotions and moods predispose our actions, okay? So there are ways for us to become aware of our moods, emotions, our thoughts, our actions. We can then make shifts to see which moods would be more resourceful. I know that anxiety, the fear of worrying about what might happen in the future, just paralyzes me. So earlier you said fight or flight. There's also freeze, you know? Yeah. So it's important for me to look at the upside as well as the downside. Well, if nothing is certain, anything is possible, right? And often we need each other, or coaches or mentors, to help us see that outside of ourselves, because this isn't a rational process that's happening. Frankly, we've all been amygdala hijacked.
You know, rational thought has gone out the window because that's what emotions do. They kind of shock us, and all of our human behaviors come out. So if I think from a work from home, I think the teams, and I happen to work with people in the township on WhatsApp during the first part of COVID, and that really intensified for me that there's a lot that gets lost in translation. We don't actually see somebody's circumstance as they're sitting on the other end, you know, what they're sitting in, what they're sitting with. So a big part for me is really making sure that we communicate, you know, and not just as communicate about what work needs to be done, what's the plan for next year, how are you actually, you know? And I think this is the funny thing about emotions. They always predispose actions. We don't have to be our emotions, so you don't have to turn into an angry person, but you can experience anger and act on it, you know, if you can become aware of it. So I think awareness is the biggest thing here.
Yes. Yeah.
You can't change what you're not aware of. Then acceptance is really important. So, you know, if leaders come in while you're working from home and they're expecting the same things that they were expecting when you were in the office, they're not acknowledging that there's a lot of things that are going on for you, and it's no longer possible to do that. So then it sets up a dishonest communication dynamic. And so coming back, I think vulnerability is really important, the tolerance for vulnerability, and being able to say and communicate honestly, candidly what's going on. You know, I mean, leaders also, the vulnerability there is maybe like, I don't actually know what's going to happen because everybody's making this up as we go along. So it relieves that, oh, my leader's going to show me where we're going to go to next. So I'm going to just summarize because I'm talking a lot, but I want to say that for me, this thing has really brought us back to, first and foremost, we're human beings and everybody's a human being. So we're pretty much going through the same thing. And often it's in our similarities that we get comfort, that we can find compassion, and that we can help each other. But we can't help each other if we don't communicate. So there has to be honest dialogue, honest communication. And I've seen with a lot of organizations that I have worked with that where the communication, the emphasis on communication and people interaction goes up, the curve is weathered a little bit more. It's still stressful, but at least we're in it together. Thanks.
Lovely. Thanks, Christelle. So yeah, I think if I just look at what you've summarized, just in the concepts you've spoken about, I think what stood out for me was we're all in change. We're all in the same situation when it comes to change. So I know there's that little meme that goes around, you know, we're all in the boat, but we're all in different boats. The reality, though, is that we're all in change, but we all see it differently. But you've touched on the concepts of resilience, emotional intelligence, and growth mindset, and it links back to what we've spoken about this evening. So, Gino, I know you want to say something, but can I bounce to Allan quickly? Sorry, your hand is, I'm going to bounce. So, Allan, so we've spoken now, of course, about all the people components of these concepts. And so we've spoken all the nice, warm, fluffy, emotional resilience and leadership concepts and all the things we need to be considerate of as leaders and organizations. However, we're keen to hear from your experience, what is all this change? What chaos has it created in your world? And sort of what's your opinion and perception of the level of change our organizations are going through and the impact they've experienced?
Can you hear me?
Yeah, loud and clear.
Thank you. Yeah, so, you know, normally we deal with those who don't want to change. That's where we get called in to work. And the change is important. Obviously, we understand that. And what COVID has done is create the vehicle to speed up that change. So what we've seen, and if you look at the different phases of change acceptance, what Gino said is true. It happens so fast. It happens so fast that people almost collided into change. It was not out of choice. It was forced upon them, and they just simply had to do what they had just to survive. so the different phases of that curve almost became synchronized, and the flow and the impact of it was a lot less than what it would normally be in terms of change, just because we had no choice. And so what we found is that employers recognize that when the best time to implement changes is when the status quo is a bit upset. And so we were able to piggyback within that curve. So along the process, introduce elements of change that would then mitigate going back into those stages of anger and denial. It's because we've dealt with those and we're just introducing a different element. So employers were able to adjust on a daily basis to the changes of customers, how they were spending, the impact that had on the business, and then apply those changes at work on individuals. And obviously, one of the big changes initially and does remain is the issue of work from home. And there's massive scope for that. I mean, it just, in so many instances, it makes sense in terms of reduction in costs, both for the company and for the employee. It really does, but it does require a special type of person. Not everyone can work from home, and we've seen that. You know, so where we come in is we've had to deal with unproductive employees trying to work from home, and we can just see that it doesn't suit your person who's not disciplined. You know, who can't operate on a structure. Someone who's not goal driven or task driven. You know, and then the flip side, we've got fantastic performing employees, guys who know what tasks they need to get done, when they need to get done by, and they get them done. And it's shown that within those people, you've got a better standard of living, because now all of a sudden they've got this little bit of flexibility in their home environment. They can go out to pick up the kids or go watch a soccer match or whatever the case is and get back to do their work. So it gives them that standard of living that they were not benefiting from before, which is significant. And we found those sort of people really have morphed into that role and are absolutely flourishing. Of course, it's heavily influenced by the person who's leading that team.
Yeah.
You know, so you've got someone who's open to using the technology, who's open to looking at a leadership style that's not authoritative, but more task or output driven as opposed to time driven, and it really does start to work. Unfortunately, the flip side is also true. We've got some really great performing employees at home, but we've got a leader who's reluctant and who wants to now bring them back to work, because that leader prefers the physical presence of someone. So that's the element of control over that employee, because I can see you at your desk, that means you're working, instead of saying, well, I can see the result you're providing. Yeah. So we've got situations now where we're dealing with those leaders who are reluctant to change, and we're dealing with people at home who are reluctant to change, and then we're also dealing with those who are at home and don't want to come back to it. They're saying, no, just leave me at home. I'm happy to continue working at home. And the employer's saying, listen, that was great, during COVID and the lockdown, but actually now we need you at work. And so that's a real problem. And the excuses people come up with to stay working at home is also very, very interesting. But yeah, it is a process, and it's definitely what we've seen is that if there's no buy-in to the change, it's simply not going to be successful. Yeah. And that buy-in's got to come from the guy on the ground and from the leader. If you get that disconnect, you end up with that dishonest communication that Christelle's talking about, and ultimately it leads to demotivation, a lack of interest in work, and then ultimately a termination of the relationship, because it's going to come, which is unfortunate. But yeah, in a nutshell, that's what we're seeing in the workspace. Unfortunately, we know that the change that we're going through is really driven by technology. Yeah, it's given us the tools to make these changes, but the ability to carry that through as an organization across to all of the individuals in the business is problematic, because ultimately it means a rationalization of workforces. It means a reduction in staff numbers, because I'm outsourcing. I'm getting a better product from an outsourced component, And in South Africa, as a country, it adds to our problem of unemployment and that sort of thing. So it's a very fine balance that we have to, as practitioners in this environment, manage that change process to say, well, ultimately, what can be done now, what needs to be done fast, and actually what can be just slowed down a little bit, because the impact of it might ultimately be negative for everyone. It might be good for your business, but if everybody does the same thing, it's going to impact on the economy, and then that impacts on everyone.
Wow.
And that's really my contribution. Thank you.
Cool. Thanks, Allan. Yeah, I think that for me, what you said there now is actually really thought-provoking. So we're all driving the change because that's kind of what everybody's telling us needs to happen in business and in organizations. But just the balance between maybe just slowing down a little, because the impact on that from a broader perspective could be quite huge. I really like that. Wow, interesting. So I think for me, I'm gonna summarize it, and I'm gonna ask each one of our panelists to answer a final question. Sorry, so I'm putting them all on the spot because it's just as you guys were talking, I just thought about it. So if we look at it, we've got the change curve, which we know is solid foundation for the fact that we go through change, and we're happy with that concept. We've gone from a leadership perspective, there's some key focus points that we need to ensure that from an engagement with our people, we are connecting, we are coaching, we are leading, we are supporting. From an individual perspective, we understand that we need to move with change, and we understand that there's all the feelings and emotions that come with that. And then from an organizational perspective, organizations, and I think from if I summarize what Allan was saying, he's going, organizations were a bit sneaky. So Allan, I heard that. They were a bit sneaky in the sense that whilst all this change was happening, they decided to just slip some more in there. And it does make perfect sense in terms of productivity, opportunity to change. So it makes perfect sense. But of course, within that, you now put the work from home, you put the work on demand, and we start understanding the pressures that can create. So as Allan was talking, and I was just thinking about it, the question that we then ask ourselves is, so how do we create the balance? Because we know we need to go through change. We know leaders need to buy into change themselves, and they need to support the change. Individuals need to buy into the change and support the change. And organizations, with all due respect, need to keep moving. And in Allan's world, there's also the legal components of what does this look like? So how do we create the balance between actually I'm working really, really well at home and I'm optimizing, versus somebody that's not optimizing, an organization that wants people back, another that's going stay at home, and individuals that are going, I want to stay at home, I want to come back. Because when I speak to organizations at the moment, it's quite a balance. Many organizations are going, nobody's coming back. Everybody else is going, hell no, they're all coming back. So how do we create the balance? So I'm going to ask each panelist just to sort of give us their sort of key takeaway in summary for how do we create the balance? And I'm going to ask you if we can see if we can get that to a minute of an answer, if that's at all possible. So, Christelle, I'm going to start with you.
Unlucky. How do we create a balance? Just ask like the biggest question ever and give me like 2 seconds to think about it. Honestly, I think it is really important to accept reality. You know, I think denial is the biggest problem, and I understand the shock and all of those things, but both from an employer perspective and an employee perspective, it's about facing reality. A lot of people also are not wanting to move because of that threat of, you know, so you kind of want to keep your job. It's a give and take. It's not, okay, if you don't give me the opportunity to work from home, then I'm out of here, you know? So I think the balance is important. It's important to keep in conversation. Conversation is the only way that we coordinate action, to be honest about those things, and to be open to the fact that it could change, you know? So I think that's the important thing. We've just come through the period. We've just had to do it. So we've got a little bit of a taste of it. And if you don't, frankly, it's going to hit you at the end. So, you know, it's being realistic. Root everything in reality first, and then you can figure out how you want to manage it.
Lovely, thank you. So I've got communication, be honest, and then reality. Cool, thank you. Sharon, your key takeaway in forming the balance or creating the
The
balance?
ladies and first, yeah, I see Christelle. Cindy, for me, the balance, and I think you alluded to it, it's going to look different for different organizations and different sectors. I believe that it's a big thing for me. Include your team, include your staff. Let them tell you how it looks. How does the balance look for my department versus another department within this organization? It can't be the same. It can't be a cookie cut approach for everybody. It's going to look different in L&D space. The way it's going to look different if I just look at Omni in our admin space and including our staff in coming up with ways as to how it looks to ensure that we meet our intent and our purpose when it comes to serving our clients. That's important for me. So yeah, it's inclusivity for me.
So inclusivity, and the other word was collaboration. Yes, which links really nicely again to actually communicating and being honest, because in that space you find the balance. Love it.
Absolutely.
Gino?
I'd suggest 3 principles or concepts. So one, being outcomes focused, the other one being impact, and the final one being trust. Accepting that change is happening all the time, right? Change is happening, outcomes still need to be realized. So we all work, we all have a job. We need to deliver on an outcome in our job, right? We need to adapt, and we need to be resilient so that we are still delivering on that outcome. Whether we now work over tech from home, from India, whatever it might be, we need to remain outcome focused. Leaders need to ask, and organizations need to ask, how can we be lean and impactful, right? We don't want to burden our people with too much meetings, and on top of home duties that they have, can we set them up to still be impactful, right? And it comes, and the foundation one, I think, is trust. As employees, as people, we want to trust our leaders, and we accept that they are trying to do the right thing, to continue to drive an outcome, to continue to drive an impact as a business. So we want to trust them, right? We can accept that they are leading in a pandemic for the first time in their lives, so they are learning, but they are still trying to do the right thing. So we'll give them an opportunity to learn, provided they are moving forward in a vision that they have sold to us and that we credibly buy into. So we accept or we hope for good leaders. As people, we also need to earn trust, right? So those of us working from home in our personal capacity still need to deliver on that impact and on that outcome that our job is, regardless of whether you work 9 to 5 or you work different hours because you are from home, etc. If you tie it back to those 3 things, I think those 3 things are what can help us tackle change in this world.
Lovely, I like it. So outcomes, there's still a business objective. Impactful, our teams do want to be successful, and then trust, which is give and receive to achieve the outcomes and be impactful. Love it. And last but not least, Allan, your wise words of wisdom tonight.
What I would say is that if your goal is to get a balance, then right at the outset, your objective needs to be realistic. You know, you set out with something that's not going to happen. It doesn't matter what you do to achieve it. You're not going to be successful in the end. So I think you've got to be realistic in what your expectation is. And then the second component, and I'm dealing it from an employee, a human perspective, is that it doesn't matter how much training, guidance, coaching you give the leader. If employees don't know what's expected of them, it's pointless. Don't even go there. So establishing those sort of key performance areas and the expectation around them working from home or working on a task basis, if you can get that buy-in on that, you are already on a significant path to achieving the balance. We know in our environment that when employees know their boundaries, they generally, and I do use the word generally, they generally behave and they stick within their boundaries. So to get that buy-in in this process, make sure it's reasonable, the goal, it's realistic, and make sure that the employee knows what you expect out of them, and chances are you'll get the balance. That's me.
Lovely.
Thank you.
Excellent. Thanks very much. So guys, yeah, we've got lots of comments. Lisa just saying expectation is key. Don't assume they know. So absolutely agree. And then Natasha's just shared a comment. I love it. It says change is hard at first, messy in the middle, and then gorgeous at the end. So we can live in hope. Yeah. Yeah, I don't know if anybody else on our panel has any last comments. And while our panelists are thinking, I don't know if there's any last questions. I'm just very aware that we are over time. So if anybody's got a burning question.
I'll maybe just say that we're grateful to the attendees. Thank you for the platform.
Thank you, Gino. Yes, and thank you. The comments coming through is just to say thanks very much. Really topical, great guidance and assistance from the panelist. Sorry, I just wanted to say, yeah, Truth Talks. Thank you so much for the connect. Just great conversation and big thanks to the panelist. Lovely. Thank you very much, guys. Thank you for joining me. Thank you for engaging, and thank you for allowing me my final question. I know it was a loaded one, but I think it's a nice one just to summarize the thought processes. So thank you. Thank you for joining us. Appreciate it. And thank you for all our attendees. Thank you for always joining us and being part of our engagement.